Pete Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel tweeted last week that the Republican Party will continue to grow what she called its rising support from the LGBTQ community, quote, by supporting measures that promote fairness and balanced protections for LGBTQ Americans and those with deeply held religious beliefs. Chasten Buttigieg called out the hypocrisy and challenged her position, tweeting, quote, those with deeply held religious beliefs are often the parents who force their LGBTQ children out of the home and onto the street. I've met with those kids. 40% of homeless youth in this country are LGBTQ. Revisit your party's platform before you open your mouth about pride. Whew. Joining us now is Chasten Buttigieg, teacher, husband of Transportation Secretary and former Mayor Pete Buttigieg, as well as the author of a really important and beautifully written book, I Have Something to Tell You, which is out right now in paperback. So I want to get to your clapback, but I want to start with your book and something that we started talking about when the hardcover came out. But it's so beautiful, and I read it again today, and I have to read this. You write this. I just knew that if I came out, I would lose my family and my friends. I'd already packed my bags and started moving out of the house before I did it. I stayed up wondering how there could be anything next for me, counting down the hours until I lost everything I knew. That's how I thought about it. I never considered the freedom I'd feel once I was able to be myself in front of my parents and friends. You write so beautifully, and it's equal parts so raw and so painful. And with the book coming back out and you coming back on, I was looking at it again, and it's just incredibly powerful. I wonder what having it out and having a chance to talk about it again has been like.
Well, thanks so much, Nicole, for having me back on. And it's fitting that it's Pride Month. I appreciate you reading that passage. You know, I'm lucky to be sitting here today. And during Pride Month, it's a great time that we recommit ourselves to sticking up for everybody in this community. And I wrote that passage truthfully. You know, I was a pretty suicidal teenager when I ran away from home at age 17. And in this country, an LGBTQ kid considers suicide about every 2 seconds. And I was one of those kids. And so I used this platform, this opportunity to share my story, but also to show up for those kids. Like you mentioned, 40% of the kids who are sleeping out on the street tonight identify as LGBTQ. So getting to the clapback, that's why we have to stand up against the hypocrisy and the dangerous language like the chairwoman put out there, because there are really vulnerable kids in this country, and that type of language hurts them.
I felt that. I mean, I felt that in your response. It wasn't this sort of political space you were occupying. It was a defense of people who are now walking in shoes you can very much relate to. And I wonder if you can just expand on that. What can we all do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I think some people like the chairwoman are focused on, you know, slapping rainbow stickers on tweets and saying you support the LGBTQ community. But really what we all need to be doing right now is working to pass the Equality Act. So if the chairwoman is right that the Republican Party is truly the party of LGBTQ inclusivity, which I believe it is not, then we should have no problem passing the Equality Act. The Equality Act guarantees sweeping civil rights legislation for the LGBTQ community. People in this country can still be denied housing, employment, education opportunities, and that's why civil rights legislation is so important. This community is consistently under attack day in and day out, specifically the transgender community, and we see that happening in Florida with Ron DeSantis using the first day of Pride to pass anti-trans legislation. And so everybody in this country can step up and call their elected officials and ask them to pass the Equality Act.
You have moved to Washington, you and Secretary Pete making it your home now. How is that?
It's warm. I'm not used to the heat yet, but I am really happy to be here.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here, a part of this, this new wave of hope in D.C. You can really feel it here in the Capitol, that this sense of leadership has returned to our nation's capital, that people here are focused on getting things done. And as we continue throughout Pride Month, I look forward to working with Pete and the administration to keep speaking up on things like the Equality Act and why, sweeping civil rights legislation is so important for the community. Other than that, we'll try to get used to the heat, especially the dogs.
Well, I don't want to bum you out, but the heat breaks like in October. I mean, you're like at the beginning. It is you understand what they call it, a swamp. I want to ask you about something you write about Secretary Pete, about your husband as well, about the isolation that he dealt with, and I read this again today too. I couldn't bear to stay in the closet when I was a teenager, and I spent years after I busted down the door battling depression and suicidal thoughts and coming to terms with the internalized homophobia that made me feel worthless. Peter, on the other hand, felt he had to stay in the closet if he wanted to make it, and he carried many of these same feelings with him in secret. I can only imagine how dark and isolating it must have felt for him. I read your book when you came on the first time, and I sometimes think of these descriptions when I see him, on all the Sunday shows as the cabinet member spearheading the campaign to build support for infrastructure. I mean, what is this journey like for him, for both of you?
Well, I've never seen him happier. I think he's definitely dedicated to the job, and I'm sort of only allowing about 3 minutes of transportation talk at the dinner table a night. But during Pride Month, for both of us, two people who have, gone through a lot in our personal lives. I came out very early, and Pete felt he had to keep a lot of things locked up inside to succeed in this country. It's a really important time for us to do our best to show up for everyone in this community. And I want to say one more thing about your question earlier, what can people do during Pride Month? I didn't come out because I felt like I was going to lose my family. And I think Pete felt the same way, not only about his family, but about his career. And if you love someone in your family, you got to let them know that. If you are truly an ally, you have to let people know that you'll show up for them. So it's just a little bit easier for them to come out and to open up and feel like they truly belong in this country.
Oh, that's such a dose of beauty in this really rough and tumble moment. Chasten, Buttigieg, thank you very much for spending some time with us. It is a beautiful book. It is called I Have Something to Tell You, and it's out in paperback now. Go buy it and read it if you haven't already. When we return,